The Minnesota Twins bring themselves a game closer to playoff contention. We'll talk about what happened here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is always cold, the Twins talk is always hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins salvaging their series against the Kansas City Royals. Here's how it happened. It looked like it was going to be another frustrating night when this game got started. The Twins having trouble getting anything going against Michael Wacha and his changeup, and when they did threaten, they stranded guys on the base paths, like in the third when Alan Roden led off the frame with the double and went to third on Victor Caratini's ground out, but Tristan Gray and Trevor Larnach both got out to end the inning. In Kansas City's half of the frame, Jack Caglione ripped a two-run double to put the Royals up by 2, which takes us to the fifth, where Royce Lewis cuts the deficit in half with a solo home run before Minnesota threatens again, this time with the bases loaded and 2 outs. However, Luke Keeschel just gets under one and flies out a few steps shy of the warning track to end the inning. Meanwhile, Salvador Perez gets one back for KC with an RBI single in the bottom of the 6th, and it looks as if the Twins are going to get swept by the hapless Kansas City Royals at the worst possible time until a timely 8th inning rally. Josh Bell drives in Luke Keeschel to pull Minnesota within a run, and Brooks Lee gets one through the right side to score 2 and put the Twins on top. Andrew Morris locks down the 8th, and Yoendris Gomez gets a pickoff and 2 strikeouts to save the game as the Minnesota Twins win 4-3. Minnesota now tied for second place in the AL Central at 57 and 59. The Twins are 3 games behind Chicago for first place in the Central and a half game behind Texas for the final AL wildcard spot. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. We are part of the Grey Duck Sports Network. You can follow us on Twitter and on YouTube at Grey Duck Sports. We are at grey.duck.sports. On TikTok, there you can find all of our podcasts, not only the Twinkie Town Tavern, but also the Vibe of the Vikings and the Grey Duck NFL show for all of our football fans, as well as different series of shorts that we are working on to keep the content flowing about the Minnesota sports landscape. Again, that is on Twitter at Grey Duck Sports, on YouTube at Grey Duck Sports, and on TikTok at grey.duck.sports. Please give us a follow there. Interact with us on the page. It means a lot. Just like this win means a lot for the Minnesota Twins. As I was watching this game, I was preparing myself to have another rant as it looked like the Twins were going to drop their 5th game in a row. And a 5th game in a row in more non-offensive fashion, where the team was not able to get anything going. It looked like it was going to be maybe a 3-1 loss or something along those lines until the 8th inning finally got us going. But even before that 8th, I want to point to the one player through this offensive rut that Minnesota has had since the All-Star break, and we talked about it in yesterday's show, that this team is averaging under 4 runs a game since the All-Star break, despite being the top offense in the American League in terms of runs scored before the All-Star break. But through it all, even during this rut, Royce Lewis has been phenomenal. And they mentioned it during the broadcast. It's now a career-high 11-game hitting streak. He gets the offense kick-started in the 5th. He saw the team struggling with runners in scoring position, runners on base, not only today, but throughout this series and throughout the last couple of series, and he decides to just take matters into his own hands and absolutely wallops a pitch out to left field. And you can tell by his reaction and bat flip and slow walk to first base as he admired his shot that this is a player that is playing the game with a ton of confidence, and that is a force multiplier for Royce Lewis. That's the secret sauce for him. When he starts to get on a roll, it continues the momentum. It goes from he has confidence, and that confidence leads him to play well, and that playing well leads him to have more confidence, and it is just this snowball effect that allows Royce Lewis to get back to the all-star level player that he was when he first came up to the team in 2022 and then became a mainstay in the lineup in 2023. That is the Royce Lewis that we need. The confident Royce Lewis, not the one that might have some immature comments at times in the dugout. We want the confident one, and that is what we are currently getting. And it was only one run. It was a solo home run, and the Twins didn't score again for another 3 innings. The offense still went quiet. The Twins still left runners on base. But for me, it is something that set the tone, and it is giving me some excitement that, one, Royce Lewis has taken his next step forward after a slump that lasted all the way starting back to the middle of the 2024 season, coincidentally after he said that he has never slumped before and he doesn't do slumps, and he proceeded to go almost 2 years into a slump. But it gives us some excitement that he can be back to the old Royce Lewis. It's been an extended amount of time where he's been hitting at a very high level, not just by his old standards, but by major league standards in general. And we'll talk about those stats in just a second. But it also is the one beacon of light in what has been a dark offensive valley for Minnesota. And you need that. You need that constant beacon of light during these times. And that's what Royce Lewis has provided with his 11-game hitting streak during this ROYCE-aissance. The major driver of offense during this whole team slump. And that allows you at times to steal some games that you otherwise should not have won. And he's not the one that came through with the clutch hit, although he got the bat taken out of his hands because he was hit by a pitch in the 8th inning in the middle of that rally. Perhaps he would have been the guy that drove in the game-winning runs instead of Brooks Lee had he been given some pitches to hit and not just been hit by a pitch. But let's just look at his numbers since the reset. And we've done this a couple of times since he came back from St. Paul after what Derek Shelton never really called a demotion, but instead called a reset for both Royce Lewis and Matt Wallner. Matt Wallner, by the way, still at AAA, but Royce Lewis played so well at AAA right away that he was back about 2.5 weeks later. And since that reset, Royce Lewis is hitting .268. He has a .335 on-base percentage and a .500 slugging percentage. Those are numbers that play at the major league level. Those are all-star caliber numbers. And you think about how bad Royce Lewis was before this span of what is now 50 games since coming back from St. Paul. In the 31 games that he played before the demotion, he was hitting under 200. He was hitting around 150. He had a couple of home runs, and his strikeout rate was through the roof. He had 37 strikeouts and 118 plate appearances, which is a 30+% strikeout rate. We're talking Miguel Sano levels of strikeout rate without the Miguel Sano power. He has power, but he doesn't have the Miguel Sano all-or-nothing swing. That's how dire it was becoming. He just was not making contact with the ball. And not only is that .268 rate right now encouraging the .268 batting average and the .335 on base percentage, but his strikeout rate has been cut into a third. He is now striking out just 20% of the time, which is a lot closer to the major league average of strikeouts. And he has 19 walks during his 211 plate appearances since the reset. So his walk rate is staying about around 10%, a little bit less right now. And in this 50 games since his demotion and then coming back up to the major league level after that 2.5-week stay in St. Paul, he is on a 20 home run, 20 stolen base pace. And if you can get that out of your first baseman who is improving every single day on defense, despite some mistakes that we have seen recently as this past week defensively at that position, if you can get that 20-20 pace out of your first baseman, you are going to be in a good spot. And we have now enough of a sample size where he has been hitting like this in 50 games for longer than he had been hitting in his absolutely dreadful slump, which was through 31 games. So he is having a high impact on this offense. And whenever some of these other hitters in the Twins lineup start to break out of their slump, Well, that just means they're one more bat to join the Royce Lewis barrage against Major League pitching. And that is something that we can look forward to. And another thing about Royce Lewis's ROYCE-aissance is that he's not dealing with any injuries. He gets hit on the elbow or the wrist or the forearm today and shakes it off. And Royce Lewis, the main problem when he was hitting at the peak of his powers in 2023 and at the beginning of the 2024 season, it was a inability to stay on the field because of constant injury day in and day out. This season, he has been healthy throughout the course of the year. That is encouraging as well. If you can get a healthy Royce Lewis, if we can now see a couple of seasons in a row without any major injury setbacks, that starts to erase this narrative that Royce Lewis is an injury-prone player. Fair or unfair as that narrative may be, that narrative now starts to get erased, and now it's just a good-hitting first baseman that can play basically every single infield position if you need him to. He could probably even play shortstop, which is where he was originally drafted at. I'm not sure it would go particularly well, but in a pinch, I'm sure he could. But that versatility and the ability to hit both right-handed and left-handed pitching, and the continued work on also trying to become an even better hitter and progress at the plate by, at times, adjusting his swing path to take balls the other way. Now, that home run, dead pull and dead power. But we've seen a couple of times over the last week or so him taking pitches the other way, or at least taking them to dead center if they're going to be left on the outside of the plate. So not only are the surface level numbers coming up good for Royce Lewis, not only are the second level beneath the hood numbers looking good, but also just the fundamentals that go into forming those numbers, the swing path, namely, is also pointing at a continued trend upwards for Royce Lewis at the plate. He is the beacon in the middle of this dark offensive valley that the Minnesota Twins have been going through. And another recent beacon just for the Minnesota Twins team at large is how good this bullpen has been in recent days. We talked about it last week against the Royals, the Twins bullpen in the series in Minnesota didn't give up any runs. Now they've made some improvements, obviously, to their bullpen. They've brought in some new players from the trade deadline, like Jeff Hoffman. But we get to see kind of what the pecking order might be for this bullpen. And Derek Shelton tonight, in high-leverage situations in which the Minnesota Twins had the lead, used Andrew Morris in the bottom of the 8th and used Yoendrys Gomez in the bottom of the 9th, the guys who have been here the entire time. And maybe, yes, could be because A.J. Minter pitched yesterday and gave up the big home run. It can also be because Jeff Hoffman pitched yesterday and looked good, but you didn't want to wear him out, I guess, super early, and you have faith and confidence in both Andrew Morris and Yoendrys Gomez. And for what it's worth, Derek Shelton said that as long as Yoendrys Gomez is available, he will be the guy closing down games in the 9th inning. But it still, I think most of the time you'd see Jeff Hoffman in that 8th inning instead of Andrew Morris. But Shelton has faith in Andrew Morris, and Andrew Morris is paying off that faith. And that is before, talking about Andrew Morris and Yoendrys Gomez, that is before we even get into what Cody Funderburk has been doing quietly and under the radar. It seems like every single game that I see the name Funderburk in the line score underneath the pitching area of the box score, I see 1 inning, 1 or 2 strikeouts, no walks, no runs. And it is a trend that has been happening since Cody Funderburk came off of the injured list and came back to the major league level at the end of June. He had 1 really bad appearance coming back up to the major league level, and then since then it's been lights out. And even with that big blow up where he gave up 3 runs, so far since coming back up, Cody Funderburk has been just as impressive as Royce Lewis. He has a 2.70 ERA since returning. He has 16 strikeouts, 4 walks. His fielding independent pitching would indicate that this 2.70 ERA is sustainable because the fielding independent pitching number is right around the 2.70 ERA. It's at 2.74. So there's not a lot of difference between those two. And fielding independent pitching is a very predictive sort of stat. It can predict future results, and it would show us that there's really no regression coming for Cody Funderburk, that this pitcher that he's been since the end of June is a sustainable pitcher. And if you are getting that from Cody Funderburk, who might be your 5th or 6th or 7th option in the bullpen, then we have come a long ways from the very start of the year. Not only is the top of our bullpen now elite with Gomez, Hoffman, and Morris, but now the middle parts and even the lower parts on the totem pole are starting to look pretty good as well. And Cody Funderburk kind of just epitomizes that. And then you see what after Funderburk comes in. He ends up getting the win, by the way, for in his appearance. He pitched a scoreless inning, kept Minnesota within a couple of runs, allowing that 8th inning rally to go on without a hitch. And instead of, potentially tying the game or just getting within one, if Cody Funderburk had blown up, the Royals get a couple of runs in that inning, and it doesn't matter what Brooks Lee is able to do in the top of the 8th. And the Twins lose 5-4. And those are just valiant fight back by a team that has had valiant fight backs throughout the course of the season, but some of those still ending in losses. That would have been just another one to chalk up under the loss column. But no, Cody Funderburk gets the job done, shuts down the Royals, which, to be fair, isn't always the most difficult thing to do against this hapless lineup. But he got the job done and then turned it over to Andrew Morris and Yoendris Gomez. And Andrew Morris right now is pitching incredibly. He has just 2 pitches that he used in this game, a fastball and a cutter. So a fastball and then a different variation of a fastball that has a lot more life and a lot more movement on it. And those pitches act as if it is like a fastball slider sort of pitcher. It's a fastball that runs a lot for Andrew Morris, that runs about a foot off of the release point. And then it's a cutter that breaks a lot, a couple feet vertically it goes down, and then also about a foot horizontally breaking. So there's the 2-foot horizontal plane difference between the fastball and the cutter, and it allows you, if you're tunneling those pitches well, and Andrew Morris has been tunneling those pitches well, because the release point and the release angle of his arm are typically pretty consistent, and they were consistent today, it becomes a lot harder for hitters to guess at. And it becomes harder for them to see coming out of the hand, which means they are going to be guessing more often than not. And if they guess wrong, it is a big swing and a miss. And he had a 40% whiff rate in his short appearance tonight. And then Yoendris Gomez, like we said, gets the pick off after walking or maybe giving up a single to Salvador Perez. They immediately bring in the Tyler Tolbert, the pinch runner, and Tolbert gets picked off with some quick feet from Yoendris Gomez. So he's able to help himself out there and then finishes the job by getting a couple of strikeouts to end the game, and your Minnesota Twins win. The bullpen, that was such a big weakness, is now becoming one of the strengths, which is getting better, and which is even more important now that the starting rotation has really for the last 2 months or so has been pedestrian or even worse. And as we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, another injury is going to be putting a dent in this rotation that already is a little bit thin on starting pitcher depth. Again, we'll talk about that in just a moment. So the bullpen, Royce Lewis, both stepping up when a lot of other things have gone wrong and have kept the Twins from falling completely out of this playoff race. We mentioned by the Pythagorean win-loss percentage over the last 18, now 19 games, the Twins should have only won 6 of those, or would be expected to only win 6 of those if we take variance out of the equation. And now they've won 9 of those games. They've gone 9-10, about 500, despite playing baseball at a level that would indicate they are a well below 500 team during that stretch. And that is what happens. You can fight through those demons if you have some pillars of this squad still performing at their optimal range. That is Royce Lewis, and that is this Twins bullpen keeping Minnesota in the pennant race all the way through and biding time until these bats can get back and hopefully until this starting rotation becomes healthy, becomes solidified, and gets all of its depth back. But let's just talk about that 8th inning rally because it was another clinic for the Minnesota Twins in clutch hitting. The art of the rally, we will call it. Luke Keeschel takes a strike, sees a sinker coming into the zone. It stays a little bit outside of the zone. And as we've seen so many times throughout the course of this season, and we didn't see a lot during 2025 and 24, by all of these Twins hitters, the approach is different. The approach is, if it is coming on the outside, just take it the other way. Just go with the pitch. Stay back on it and drive it. Luke Keeschel did. He drives a line drive into right field to get on base. And then Ryan Jeffers, again epitomizing what this Twins team does at its best when the offense is rolling, and especially in these situational at-bats. Works a 9-pitch walk. Doesn't swing at anything out of the zone. Doesn't chase. Fouls off a couple of pitches. Stays alive. And draws a 9-pitch walk. So now you've got the runners on first and second. Josh Bell, he takes a backdoor sweeper the other way from the left-hander Aaron Bummer. Bell hitting in the right-hand side, so when that sweeper is coming across the plate with the 2 strikes, he was trying to locate it on the outside corner and get a strikeout looking against Josh Bell, or maybe he was trying to come further inside. Whatever it was, he leaves a sweeper lower part of the zone, but still out over the plate, and Josh Bell doesn't, who I think has been one of the better contact hitters for Minnesota so far this season in terms of just putting bat on the ball, regardless of it being a hit or a ground out or whatever. His contact rate is pretty high, and it was high there. He takes it the other way. He just works with what he was given and takes that sweeper the other way. Then Royce gets hit by the pitch. A run scored on the Josh Bell single, and then Brooks Lee, he, does not epitomize what the team has done super, super well in the process of getting the result, but the result fell in line with what we've seen from this Twins team time and time again, because he takes an outside pitch and rolls over on it, but he has enough power to, despite rolling his wrists over on it, to keep it above the ground and to drive it through the right side of the infield and bring in 2 runs with the bases loaded. And now the Minnesota Twins, I believe, have 114. They lead Major League Baseball with 114 RBIs with the bases loaded. That is 40 more than they had all of last season. They had 74 RBIs with the bases loaded all of last season, and now they could double that by the end of this year. And it is in first place in all of Major League Baseball once again. And sometimes that's just baseball. You roll over on one, but it finds the outfield grass anyway. That's what happened on that Brooks Lee at bat. It brings in 2 runs, and the Minnesota Twins rally for 3 in the 8th to take the 4-3 win and really maybe not save the season, because the Guardians still lost and the White Sox also lost, so the Twins would still be right in the playoff hunt and be in the same position and the same amount of games behind Cleveland and Chicago in the playoff race, but certainly gives them some confidence if it doesn't straight out save the season. I think there would have been a lot of emotional baggage, at least on the fan side of things, and I'm sure some of that would start to creep into the dugout if you get swept by a Kansas City team that has been god-awful all season long. If that would have happened, then I think we're having a different conversation at the end of this show and talking about how disappointing this team has been since the trade deadline and whether they actually would be able to put it together a game like this where they come back against a bullpen, against Aaron Bummer, who definitely is not peak Aaron Bummer anymore, but has had a lot of success in the past against the Minnesota Twins. They're able to rally against him, and they're able to get the job done. So at the very least, it is a feel-good victory that, again, gives you confidence heading into the Milwaukee series and at least ends this series that had been so pitiful on a good note. Meanwhile, news and notes as we continue the Joe Ryan saga. Joe Ryan ace pitcher of the Minnesota Twins, is going to go on the 15-day injured list. He is dealing with a strained left glute. So for a right-handed pitcher, that's not going to be the glute that you push off on. It's going to be the one that you land on when you're coming down. When you drive off of your right leg, your left leg has to balance your body, so maybe the follow-through hasn't been there, and that could be contributing to some lack of command and lack of placement of the fastball exactly where Joe Ryan wants to put it. I don't know if that would exactly explain why the velocity has been low in recent starts for Joe Ryan, and so I'm still a little bit concerned there, but to his credit, Derek Shelton did say that Joe Ryan, his injury is nothing serious, that after having an MRI, it looks like it's not going to be serious. It probably will only be 15 days, so he'll probably just miss the 3 starts, maybe some more if he has to go on a rehab assignment, but he should be back for the home stretch in September, and hopefully that time off has, at the very least, given him some rest, because I think it's something that he has desperately needed. A pitcher that has struggled to get through a 162-game season throughout his entire career could use a couple weeks off and a couple of weeks of just resetting himself, much like Royce Lewis was able to do, to reset himself at St. Paul and then come back up and be a whole new, renewed hitter for Minnesota. So that is what the hope is on my side for Joe Ryan. Again, it's still disappointing that it took 3 bad performances for him to finally admit that he wasn't feeling 100% in the post-game interview after the Twins' loss in the opener of this series against Randy Dominick, of all people, especially for somebody that has had the history of hiding injuries or keeping them from the training staff, the manager, his pitching coach in the past for the detriment of the team. It still is disappointing that that is still something that we are dealing with from a pitcher that is supposed to be a team leader for Minnesota, but he finally does admit that he has been dealing with something, that he hasn't been 100%, and that has affected his mechanics and his ability to repeat his mechanics time and time again, which again is going to lead to a lack of command, lack of location, lack of control, whatever it is that you want to call it, not putting the ball in the correct place, exactly where he wants to put it. And it hasn't really been, I guess, lack of control, because his walk rate has stayed pretty steady with what it was season-wide. I think it's just not placing the fastball exactly in the high part of the zone where you want to put it. Maybe it gets a little bit lower, maybe it gets a little bit off the or onto the plate a little bit more, and that becomes a juicier pitch for elite hitters to take. That repeating of mechanics is something that is so driven into the minds of starting pitchers everywhere by their pitching coaches. Be able to repeat your mechanics, and you will have a much better time hitting your spots and executing your pitchers with good command. And I think if Joe Ryan can do that, if this glute strain is able to heal and he finds some more confidence and comfortability in repeating his mechanics, then we get back to having the old Joe Ryan. That will all remain to be seen whenever it is that Joe Ryan returns to the starting rotation. In the interim, it will be Zebby Matthews taking his spot in the rotation. He'll actually start in Minnesota's series opener against Milwaukee this weekend. He spends not even a week, I think, in St. Paul. He was essentially called down on Friday, I believe, after his start on Friday against the Seattle Mariners, when the Twins, during that start where he was nibbling on the zone and looking bad early on in that start, they had traded for Dean Kramer in the middle of while Zebby Matthews was struggling. So he really only misses a week of action for Minnesota, and he will be back with the club and starting for them for the second Friday in the row. It's like he never even left. He just got to have a nice vacation at St. Paul. He got to visit the historical center, which is, A+ recommendation. I love it. You get to go in the little tornado house. You got the Science Museum down there. You can go to the XL Energy Center when the Wild are there, or Grand Casino Arena, I guess it's called. A lot of fun things to do. So hopefully Zebby Matthews was able to enjoy being a St. Paul tourist for the last week, and now he is ready to meet the Twins in Milwaukee as they begin their series there. That first game of the series is going to pit Zebby Matthews against Shane Drohan of the Milwaukee Brewers. We do get to see Jacob Misiorowski during this series. I don't know if that is a privilege or more of a punishment, but if you are just a pure fan of baseball, as much as you are a Twins fan, just being able to see Jacob Misiorowski go up against your team, it should be fun, if not a little bit disheartening. We'll see if the Minnesota Twins can steal one against Misiorowski there. The Brewers are one of the best teams in baseball. I think they have the best record in baseball. They were the number 1 seed in the National League last year as well, so this is a team that is not to be trifled with and not to be taken lightly. Zebby, 4-8 with a 5.22 ERA this year. Shane Drohan, 6-4 with a 3.48 ERA. That game in Milwaukee, first pitch scheduled for 6:40 p.m. Central Time. And that is going to be the last call on the Twins Talk for tonight. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after the next one. Back on Monday. Go Twins.